So we're calling this tips for applying as opposed to rules for applying or restrictions for applying, because obviously everyone's application process is going to be a little bit different. And these are just some best practices that we've found in the many applications that we've reviewed, but in no ways are meant to be prescriptive. Everyone's portfolio is slightly different, everyone's resume is slightly different, and that's one of the things that's really exciting about our cohorts. So I want to start out with an introduction to the fellowship, if any of you are not familiar with it, or haven't heard about our fellowship before and are just getting introduced to it for the first time. We support mid-career level immigrant artists working in narrative art forms. Obviously, that's a pretty broad definition. Some art forms that we've found in the past that fit into that is writing, filmmaking, visual storytelling, theater, illustration, comic book writing, podcasting, and obviously there's more that could fit into that definition. The reason that we really focus on narrative art forms is because Define American has a history in culture change work in the narrative space. So that's where Define American's expertise is, that's where Define American's connections are, and those are the industries that Define American works in. And so we find that we can be the most help to artists that are working in the storytelling realms. This year, we're accepting 5 fellows. As you know, applications are open now. They'll be open until midnight Pacific time, February 4th. Don't wait until the last minute. You'll want to have plenty of time for that application. This year, the cohort runs from May 1st to November 30th of 2022. Each fellow receives a $5,000 stipend to support them over the course of the fellowship. This is a no restriction grant. Fellows can use that for cost of living. Fellows can use that for projects, whatever it's needed for. There's no reporting required on that stipend. And the bulk of the fellowship are workshops and conversations. We hold about 6 to 8 workshops over the course of the fellowship that focus on topics around developing your career, getting to know your audience and how to reach your audience, demystifying industries in the narrative art forms, and developing community with other immigrant artists. These workshops and conversations are scheduled around the fellows' schedules. They're all virtual and online. Fellows don't have to move anywhere for this fellowship. They can stay right where they are. We hope to perhaps have some in-person gatherings in 2022. We're all still sort of waiting to see what happens with current health guidelines, but if everything is safe, then we hope to have that opportunity in 2022. But the majority of the fellowship will be online. In addition to these workshops and conversations, at the end of the fellowship, we also do training around how to apply for program grants. We know that the majority of artists, especially at this stage in their career, most of their projects are funded by grants. So not only do we go through the process of learning how to write grants to apply for funding, we also have special grant opportunities that the fellowship offers only to fellows, and you'll have the opportunity to apply for those at the end. So who should apply? Obviously, artists working in narrative art forms. We know that not everyone working in narrative art forms consider themselves an artist. So we also say storytellers, creators who happen to be immigrants. Just a few career paths of former fellows: comic book artists, fiction writers, filmmakers, illustrators, memoir writers, musicians, nonfiction writers, photographers, playwrights, podcasters, poets. And we hope to add many more to this list. So if all of that sounds exciting, this sounds like a fellowship that you're really interested in, you fit into one of those categories as a primary creator in one of those art forms, what else? What else do you need to know? So not only do you need to be at a good career path, but you also need to be at a place where you know where you're hoping to go next. Some of the questions in the application are around, where are you? At what point are you in your career? What have you already accomplished, and where are you hoping to go? We get a lot of applications from really excellent artists But we want to make sure not just that you're already an excellent artist, but that we can be helpful to you in where you're going next. So if you haven't been thinking about this for a while, I recommend taking a moment before you get to the essay questions to ask yourself, what do you feel like is the next step? And it doesn't have to be a huge step. You can be a writer who is working on short stories and you feel like now's the time for you to start looking for publishers. That could be your next step. You could be a comic book artist who's been mostly doing digital work and you're looking to maybe self-publish your first piece. That can be your next step. Or it could be something huge. You could be a shorts filmmaker that's ready to make the jump to your first feature and are just looking for support and guidance, especially around grants and fundraising. And that could be what your next step is. And that really leads to the next point, which is to take your time and be candid with the application essay questions. You can be rest assured that we are very impressed with you. We spend time looking at the hundreds of applications that we receive and are totally floored by the talent that's represented by them. So in no ways feel intimidated. Don't feel like this is not a place for you. It definitely is. We love your work. But we also, once again, just want to be sure that we can be helpful to you. So take your time with the essay questions, be candid with the answers, no need to overinflate where you are. We definitely have turned down artists because we felt like they were too qualified or too far along in their careers to really benefit from this fellowship. So be candid. You can be open about where you are and what roadblocks you're hitting and where you'd like to go next. Submit a strong portfolio. This is probably one of the biggest areas that we think we could see growth in. One thing that's really interesting about our fellowship program is that we are receiving artists from a broad range of art forms. And so we don't have a really strict portfolio requirement or guidelines because it really depends on your medium and also where you're interested in going next. We've put together a few examples of different portfolios, including Yao's and Gricia's, who they're going to talk about theirs. But a few things to mention. One is it's really helpful to have everything in one place. So whether that's a website link or a PDF, having all of your work that you want to share with the reviewers in one place is really helpful. We've often been sent just an artist's website link without any specific page to look at, and the reviewers are just clicking all around trying to figure out what work this artist is doing and what the best examples are. And unfortunately, not only do the reviewers not have time for that, but sometimes they can miss things just because they don't find it. So making it really clear and easy for reviewers to see your work is really helpful. And secondly is really choosing your strongest pieces. Whether you're a writer and you're looking for your strongest pieces of writing, or you're a filmmaker and you just want to share a couple of your strongest films, choosing the best pieces and just a few is also really helpful for reviewers. Reviewers wish that they had time to spend hours and hours on applications, but unfortunately they don't. And so having the strongest pieces first and able to look at quickly is really helpful for reviewers. This is two different examples of what a portfolio could look like for film. This was a artist in our program last year in 2021, Ashko Hua. They are an excellent documentary filmmaker, currently working in shorts. And these are two different ways that Ash could have submitted their portfolio. One is a website link with direct links to the films that include, links to the Vimeo that you can just click through. Ash shared this page because it's specifically where the films are, so the reviewer could click on it and then click on the films and watch them. That's one option. Another option is to attach a PDF with Vimeo links to the films, and if the Vimeo link requires a password, listing the password, so that the reviewer can go to that PDF, click on the Vimeo link, enter the password, and watch the short films. Ash has made several films. They chose these three because they were the most recent work. You're welcome to choose the most recent work, or you can choose earlier work if you feel like it's stronger, totally up to you. But 2 to 3 pieces is probably the maximum that reviewers would have time to look at. The next example is writing. And I'm going to invite Grecia to join me for this, since this is their portfolio example. As you can see, there's a website link option where it linked to specifically the poetry section of their website, where Grecia had already selected her favorite work and put it all in one place for their viewer to look at and click through, or an attached PDF with a manuscript and a children's book that she had already written that reviewers could just scroll through and read on their own. So Grecia, I'd love to hear, what goes through your thought process when you're choosing which pieces to put on your website or which pieces to put in your portfolio. How do you decide?
Well, at the time, I decided to go with the published poems that I had. Even though I had a full manuscript of poetry, I decided to go with the published poems that I had. And I also went with a PDF of my children's book, which has been my most recent work out, and is probably one of the things I was the most proud of at the time. And my website right now, thankfully, has a lot more things that have been published since then. But at the time, that's what I focused on.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Were there pieces that you had to leave off? Like, were there things which you're like, oh, this is really great, but I just don't know if the reviewers will have time? Like, how do you make those decisions?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I had a whole poetry manuscript. So that was over 50 pages of poems. And even though I have poems that I really loved that haven't been published, I think it made it easier for myself to say, I'm just going to go with what's been published. Because otherwise I could have just gone back and forth forever on which ones to pick.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And Grecia will be back in the Q&A too, if you have more questions for her. So the next example is Yao's work, and Yao, as she introduced herself, is an illustrator and comic book artist. On the left, you can see an example of her online illustration portfolio, which is a direct link on her website that she could add to the application. And then on the right, she has an attached PDF version, which is laid out more like a slideshow for reviewers to flip through as they're trying to get the breadth of her work. Yao, how did you go about putting together not only your portfolio in a PDF version, but deciding what goes on your website portfolio as well?
Thank you, Bethany. So for the application PDF, I chose my most narrative work, and I also chose to illustrate what I need, the direction that I need to go in for the fellowship, because I worked for quite a few years in the commercial illustration industry. So I want to show that I'm very confident in that aspect, but I need a lot more support on transitioning into more artistic work and nonprofit work. So that might not that might not show through just showing my website, because it does look like I am working on a lot of things, and that can be unclear what I want to say with the portfolio. So I opened with the strong single page illustrations, and then I attached the comic work that I am the most proud of, and they are also the most recent, just with the most impactful and the kind of work that I want to continue to create. That is a little harder to find funding in the commercial field, and I want to find out more ways to work in the community and get more funding on the nonprofit side. So I definitely chose to leave out some of the work that can look very polished, but is something I already know how to get support for. And then I put in the work that basically illustrate, I want to do this more, I don't know how to pay for it, and I need people to talk about this with. So that's the heavy bulk of the work that I put in the PDF, which won't be on my portfolio, because on the website I want people to know that they can hire me and I don't have any problem doing anything. So yeah.
I love that distinction between your website work and your portfolio that you submitted specifically for this fellowship. You really curated your attached PDF portfolio specifically for this fellowship and how you wanted to grow. And I think that's such a great example of what I was saying earlier about the essay questions, and that for sure can follow through in your portfolio work. Showing the work that's representative of where you are and also of where you hope to go in your portfolio is so helpful. Similarly to when you're applying for a job or an opportunity and you customize your cover letter, even if your resume is the same, you're wanting to highlight parts of it that are really applicable to this opportunity. So doing that with your portfolio too is also a great idea. Thank you so much, Yao. And Yao will also be available again in the Q&A for any more questions that you have. Sort of related to that, in your application, both in your essay questions as well as in your portfolio, is to focus on your storytelling work. So we know that artists are coming from a myriad of backgrounds. We have many multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary artists who've been in our fellowship or interested in our fellowship. And they've done work, in all kinds of different ways for all kinds of different audiences. We recommend that if you have a large body of work and are working in a lot of disciplines and you're trying to figure out which pieces to really highlight in your portfolio or which experiences to talk about in the application, to focus on the parts that represent storytelling. That doesn't mean that it has to be all, purely artistic work. We definitely have people that apply that have done commercial work, filmmakers that have done product work and those kinds of things. That's fine. We just want to see that there's a storytelling angle to it, that your main focus is storytelling and developing your storytelling abilities and developing an audience for that storytelling work. And finally, this is something that I like to end on, that this is not your only opportunity. We get, once again, so many wonderful applications from really excellent qualified artists every year that we unfortunately just don't have space for. We're a pretty small fellowship, and we can only accept a very small percentage of the number of applications that are truly worthy of a fellowship spot. It's a very hard decision. We have a large review team that spends hours and hours poring over this and having debates about this. And so know that your work is being very thoughtfully considered. And if this is not the opportunity for you, then I would recommend using that portfolio and all of the time that you've spent on your essay questions and applying to other opportunities, or just using that thought project to help connect with your audience in a different way or share your work in a different way. In addition to this fellowship, Define American is also developing opportunities to connect with storytellers and artists throughout the year. We're very excited to have this opportunity, hopefully in person as well as virtual in this year. So if the fellowship doesn't end up being the right fit, then there will be other opportunities this year to connect with Define American and to connect with other immigrant artists. And we'd love to have you involved in that as well. We're going to open it up to questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and bring Yao and Gracia back.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to keep my camera off, but we'll be running the Q&A section. The first question we have is for visual artists, what is defined as published? My work has not been in magazines or books, but in a lot of places. How is that weighed in the application?
Just to be clear, you don't have to have any published work necessarily to apply for the fellowship. We're just sort of using being published as kind of a benchmark, but we know that everyone's careers develop differently and you could be really far along in your practice and still not be published. Also, we do define publishing very broadly. So definitely digital publication being posted online or on a social media site definitely counts as being published. But also, once again, if you've just been sharing stuff on your own Instagram or in other spaces, that definitely counts.
Great. Second question. How many minutes total will reviewers watch a work sample? Thanks very much for this info session.
That's a great question. I'm assuming this is applying to film work. I'm going to answer it as if it's film, and feel free to add more in the Q&A if I'm not answering the question. But for films, if they're short films, the reviewers will watch the whole thing, assuming it's under 30 minutes. If it's a feature-length film, we usually have the reviewers watch the first 15 to 20 minutes just to get a sense of it. And if they feel like it's really worth considering, they'll share with some colleagues and watch the whole thing. But for shorts, we would watch the whole thing.
Excellent, thank you. I'm gonna go a little bit now to the chat because there's a few questions here. She says that she's a writer. Can I apply even though my work is developed in other language than English?
Yes, you are welcome to apply if your work is originally in another language. We have reviewers who speak many languages, but the common language amongst us is English. So if at least some of your work is translated in English, that's really helpful for us, just so that, regardless of the languages spoken on the team, that we can review it all together. That's very helpful. We have had other writers include their work both in the original language and a translation in English, and that's also completely acceptable.
Excellent. And we have a similar question here. Do I have to translate the work I want to submit into English? Some of my stronger pieces are in Spanish. I published them in a literary magazine.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, similar answer to that one too. You're welcome to submit the Spanish language version in your application because we do have Spanish speaking reviewers, but if you could also include an English translation so that once again, the whole team can look at it, that's super helpful.
And now we go back to the Q&A section. I guess I wouldn't call myself a mid-level artist yet. I applied last year and was very helpful in understanding where I could have done better. Would you advise a guest applying as an early career artist with much smaller body of work?
That's a great question. I think that if you have a very clear understanding of where you are and how the fellowship could help you, please include that in your application. We have had fellows that were earlier in their careers and had a smaller body of work, and they were included because they had a really clear direction that they were heading in, and Define American felt like it was a direction that we could help with. Something that's sort of unique about Define American as a fellowship is that we are not an arts organization. We are a culture change organization. And so we don't have the same capacity to help with craft development that some fellowships that are at arts institutions do. And so that's why we mostly focus on artists that we can help with in their career development as opposed to their craft or artistic development.
Excellent. The next question is how and when the $5,000 stipend will be diverse? Can that be used for a specific project I'm working on or to pay myself for my practice or go to continue working on a specific project? Thanks.
Great question, and happy to clarify this. The $5,000 stipend is paid out at the beginning of the fellowship. We have a little bit of paperwork to do, and then we pay that out. It is a no restrictions grant. It can be used for a project. It can be used to pay yourself. You don't have to report on that money. Something else that's unique about our fellowship is that we're not a project-based fellowship. We support the artist as an individual as opposed to supporting projects. And we found that that's something people might not be used to. So yes, you're welcome to use it for a project, or also welcome to just use it for cost of living or whatever you need. One fellow 1 year bought a car with their stipend because they really needed it to get around for the work that they were doing.
Fantastic. This is similar questions. We got two similar questions here. Is it possible to apply as a joint applicant? Somebody else also asked, can I submit collaboration work?
Yeah, very good question. Something that we get all the time, and we should probably put on our website because we get asked it so often. Because this fellowship is supporting the artist as an individual, we don't do joint applications. We recommend that artists that are working together on a project each apply as individual artists, and they can mention their project and mention that they work with collaborators. Obviously, we take collaboration very highly. We want to promote collaboration between artists as well as artists and communities, so that in no way detracts from your application if you talk about your collaborators. But we don't do joint applicant applications because we really want to have the capacity to support each artist as an individual.
I'm going to throw this question to Gracia. Hi, Gracia. I'm also a poet and I will love to apply with some of my work. Most of my work is in Spanish. What recommendations do you have for a poet to make it to the top 5? Thank you so much.
Well, I think something that's great about the application is I think that the questions are just as important as the portfolio. And if for some reason you feel like there's something in the portfolio that maybe you're nervous about, or you think it's not where it should be for the application, you can always talk about that in the question section of the application. For me, like I mentioned, I have other poems that I love way more, but for the application, I decided to just go with what I had published at the time, because I think also, it's been 2 years since I applied, and my ideas have changed a lot about what makes work worthy, if anything, right? And so I think just go with your gut and just pick what you think it's strongest, even if it hasn't been published. And as Bethany mentioned before, definitely try to translate some of your work, just because as someone who has also been in the selection committee, we don't always just get to pick who we review initially. And definitely to not get overlooked, make sure that everyone can review some of your work.
Amazing. Next question, and here's for the musicians out there. Hi there, for musicians, what's the time limit for submitted songs? And are fellows asked to host workshops as well as attend them?
Two really good questions. No time limit on the songs. Once again, just choose the best ones. We probably wouldn't listen to an entire album, but if you had like a few songs you wanted to highlight from the album, I'm happy to listen to them in their full length. The second part of the question was about, I'm blanking now.
The second part of the question was about if fellows were required to host workshops or just attend them.
Great question. You're not required to host workshops as a fellow. If that's something that you're interested in doing, we definitely like to have space for that. Yao hosted a workshop during her cohort. Do you want to speak to that experience, Yao?
Sure. We have opportunities to host workshops. It is not a requirement, and we had a couple opportunities where we could propose topics to be discussed, and then the other fellows can choose to join in on the discussion. So I had this question that I was kind of grappling with, which is what are the ethics for independent artists and immigrants when we are creating our own work, or when we are funding our own work? How are we how do we deal with vendors and sponsors and corporate clients and all that in the middle of everything? So we had a very cool discussion, and that's an opportunity to host a workshop that I otherwise wouldn't be as motivated to do. So I really liked that opportunity, but it's not a requirement. And I was really glad the other fellows were open to join and to support me on that discussion.
We have so many great questions, everybody. Thank you so much. Next question. This probably isn't an application related question, but is there some sort of sponsorship that is given to participants chosen for the fellowship? I read that you can't currently be on a degree seeking program, so how would you go about staying in the fellowship but also needing a type of visa status to do the fellowship? Thank you.
That's a very good question, and a very pertinent one, I'm sure, to many artists that are interested in this. We unfortunately are not at a place that we can offer visa sponsorship as part of the fellowship. If you are looking for a recommendation letter or something like that that can help bolster an application, we're happy to write that. But Define American doesn't currently offer any kind of visa sponsorship. The degree seeking program question is one that we also get a lot, and I feel like, once again, probably something we should clarify on our website. The reason that we have that requirement is twofold. One, that usually artists that are in degree seeking programs, be it a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, are already in a position where they're receiving support for their work, assuming that they're in an artistic kind of program. And so we feel like they're already in a place where right now they're getting support, and though we'd love to have them in the fellowship maybe later on after they finish their program, right now we just don't know if there's much that we could add to the support that they're already receiving. And the second is just a reality of the amount of time that school takes. It's, obviously so much work just to be in school, especially if you're in an artistic program, the amount of work that you have to be doing, meeting with your own cohorts, taking classes, maybe you're TAing also, that's a lot of work. And so just having the space to really get the most from the fellowship, we've found in the past that's really difficult. I don't want to put you on the spot about this, Yao, but you started an MFA program just recently, and I'm curious, like, what you found with that amount of time versus the amount of time for the fellowship.
Yeah, at first I really freaked out about that because I'm sure someone will be in this position where I was applying for an MFA that would have started in the fall, like right on like September 1st. And then the fellowship ends on September 30th. So there was just a little bit of overlap. And as soon as I got into school, it was so overwhelming. There was so much work. I'm in a MFA program for creative nonfiction writing. And then just immediately I was completely swamped with work. And I also started teaching a college level course. And I would say the support that I got from a college institution was a lot to carry me over to the end of 2021. And on the fellowship, though, it was what really got me through the first half of 2021 when I was not in any kind of program. I was freelancing, but my work is pretty slow because of the pandemic. So it provided this major structure week to week. So I barely had anything else to do. So I was there on time every single time. And I really appreciated that. It was a lot like being in grad school, but it was more time to develop my own work than grad school.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then Gracia, this is a little bit off topic, but I feel like it's relevant and we might get questions about this too. You had a full-time job while you were in the fellowship. Can you talk about what it was like balancing that, a full-time sort of 9 to 5 kind of job with the fellowship experience?
I think I had the advantage of being in New York, and then with some of the time zones for the other participants, I was ahead of everyone, and then the other people were, and then Chicago and Phoenix and LA. So I was able, all the workshops, our schedules are taken into consideration. And so all of our workshops were started pretty much, I would finish work and then log into our Zoom. And so sometimes that was definitely a little bit exhausting to go from, especially like I had the privilege to be remote all 2020, but it was still really exhausting to go from working all day to like going right into the workshop sometimes. But I think I was just very grateful that our schedules was taken into account. And I also have a daughter, and that was also something I had to juggle sometimes. Sometimes she would come and be like, "Are you done?" But I think I have support at home with my daughter, and if I needed to log off work a little bit early, usually my job was very supportive, and so I was able to make it work. But it can definitely get a little bit exhausting at some points.
I can only imagine. So a few questions here around filmmakers. I'm going to try to summarize it as much as possible. We have some filmmakers that are asking that they have narrative content versus unscripted content, documentary, what have you. Is there any emphasis that any content that's better to apply for the fellowship with? Do you have any preference over narrative or unscripted content?
No preference between narrative and unscripted content. We're mostly like interested in the quality and level of your work, as well as the themes that you're exploring. So if you feel like that's represented both in your narrative and unscripted work equally, then feel free to share both.
Excellent. A follow-up on film samples. I'm working on a feature film and have done shorts before. Knowing that there's a limited time for panelists, would 15-minute of the feature and full short for team work for the submission? There's a few folks who also ask about whether 2-hour-long films is better, or is it better to just keep it short and simple for the applications?
Yeah, probably better to keep it short and simple. If you have a feature length film that you want to submit, of course, you're welcome to. I think if you could let the reviewers know which section you feel like they should watch of the film, at least for the first round of review, whether it's the first 15 minutes or if there's like a 15-minute section, if you just want to give time codes so they can focus on those, that would be super helpful. Just so we make sure that we don't miss your best work.
For portfolio, is it appropriate to submit something that I will be working on during the fellowship? I have a teaser for a film that I'm working on. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, you're welcome to submit work in progress. Just always helpful to note that for us. You know, if it's a Vimeo link, just having a card at the front or a subtitle that says it's a work in progress is helpful. Or if you're submitting it in a PDF, then just putting a note for that piece that it's a work in progress, then we'll review it appropriately.
And we have a playwright in our midst. I'm a playwright. I have a few full-length plays and some short plays and monologues and stories. Is the length of the play important? Should I submit at least 15 pages of the full length along with the short ones?
Yeah, you're welcome to submit full length and short, one-act play pieces, whatever, once again, you feel like is strongest. If it's a very, very long play, once again, the reviewer would probably look at the first 15 or so pages, at least in the first review, but you're welcome to include the full thing. Just want to be open about how much of it we'd probably have time to look at in the first review.
Great. There's two questions here that are similar. One is a photographer and a filmmaker, and they have a portfolio that both includes photos and films. The other one has two disciplines, writing and illustration. Both of them are asking, do they need to submit for both? Or can they submit for one area that they want to develop during the fellowship?
Great question. Once again, it's about, figuring out what part of your artistic career you want to share with us through the application and portfolio process. So if you feel like your film and photography are at an equal level of development, you're welcome to share both. If you feel like you're exploring similar themes or storytelling ideas through both of them, that's fine also. But if you are, for example, a filmmaker and a photographer, but you're really going in the direction of photography, then I would focus on that in the portfolio, because once again, that's where you are and where you hope to go. And that's what we're really looking for in the application review process.
I became a mom during the pandemic. Congratulations. Will I be able to bring him to workshops sometimes if I don't have anyone to watch him? Thanks.
I feel like Gracia should answer this one. I'll just give you like our official stance. It's a virtual fellowship. So, whoever is in the room with you is up to you. We'd love to have them. Gracia, what was your experience being a mom and a fellow?
Yeah, sometimes my daughter would peek in and come in and she'll want to try to look at who was presenting and things like that. I think, my daughter is much older. She was 8 at the time. So she did understand boundaries and things like that. And I will have to be honest, sometimes I did find it very distracting. I have to turn off my camera for a second and be like, I need you to give me some space, which with a baby, I'm sure that that's not possible yet. So I think, being a parent is so hard, and being a parent, the pandemic is so hard. But if you somehow have managed to have a schedule for yourself as a mom, then definitely consider that schedule when giving the times for when you're available for a workshop. Like maybe it's better to do it earlier in the day when maybe be napping or something. So I feel like that might be something to consider.
Next question here. What are resources supports are offered for musicians and songwriters?
So we offer the same resources and support regardless of the medium. That's how we're able to have a cross-disciplinary fellowship. So we're really focused on career development, audience development, and figuring out ways to have a more sustainable career in the arts. So we find, once again, that we have the most connection and the most experience and the most network in narrative art forms. And so if you are a musician or songwriter who's very much using your work in a sort of storytelling context, or in a maybe you write for theater or for film or something like that, I feel like we can be the most helpful. We don't offer any specific workshops around writing a song or connecting with musicians. Our conversations are a little bit broader than that.
Thank you. And Do we need to include an artist statement for our portfolio work?
No, you don't have to. You sort of answer artist statement kind of questions in the essay section of the application. So that's what we're looking at. If you have a portfolio that's maybe connected to an exhibited show that you had an artist statement, you're welcome to include that, but it's not required.
Around how many images would be best for visual artist illustration portfolio?
I'm gonna let Yao take this one because her portfolio was excellent and it's why we showed it as an example. How do you decide that, Yao?
How many? I think it should be an amount that doesn't overwhelm your reviewer. So I would limit the same type of work to I don't know. I have that like big splash page with probably like 10 images, but it's just to show the style. So that's not like a page by page. So that's one way to show a lot if you don't really need to show individual one. And I showed maybe several comics, I think three comics that are narrative form. I think any more than that is kind of fatiguing to read. So I just try to make an amount that I hope that folks get a sense of what the work is like, and then include a lot of photos of a project that I did at the end that was a community engagement project. So it has like maybe 6 to 8 photos that are on the same project. But like I try not to be overwhelming because there's a lot of things to choose with, and I don't want people to forget what it is after. So I think like 12 to 20 images in total is probably the limit for visual for me to look at.
Yeah, I think that's a really great parameter. And once again, it depends sort of on how you're presenting them. If it's just like image after image after image, probably the reviewer is going to get fatigued. But if you're organizing them onto one page with sort of like a theme or a style, then you could fit more images on that page. But once again, like how much do you need to show your best work and to show sort of where you're going with your storytelling and style? Just include that many. No need to do too many.
Along those same lines, this is from a writer director. Is it better to submit both a short film and a short script that needs funding, or is it better to submit finished films?
I think this is similar to the work in progress question. So just to return to that, we want to see where you are in your career, what you've done, and also where you're going. So if you feel like the work that you've completed is really strong and a good example of where you are, then I would, if it were me, I would include at least one of those pieces. But if you feel like you're really headed in a different direction with your career or your artistic voice or style, and you feel like that's best represented by the work in progress, be that a script or a teaser or a film that's not fully at final picture lock, you're welcome to share that work in progress as well. Once again, it's always helpful for us to know what when it is a work in progress, just so that we review it that way instead of reviewing it as a finished piece.
Somebody else asked if they want to focus on 2 disciplines during the fellowship, do they have to submit samples for both disciplines? For example, if they want to work on writing and illustration, do they have to submit a writing sample and an illustration sample?
If it were me, I would. If your application essay answers are about how you want to develop your writing and illustrating, but you've only been writing and never illustrated, I think for the reviewers, they might question whether you're at a place that's really where you want to be or not. So if you are headed in any direction, showing that you've already taken a few steps in that direction, even if it's still rough and still developing and not as strong as your previous art form, I think that's helpful just for the reviewers to see that you're really serious about this new direction that you want to go in.
And I think our final question is a question around delivery methods for their portfolios. Is a Google Drive folder good for a filmmaker portfolio?
Yeah, you can include a Google Drive folder link. I would be cautious about doing that with a film portfolio just because film files tend to be really large, and sometimes that makes opening them in Google Drive a little difficult. They don't always load immediately. I think a better option is a closed link, like a password protected Vimeo link, or even an unpublished YouTube video, those tend to open more easily and just be less for you to have in a folder. But we would accept a Google folder link if that's how you prefer to do it.
And I was mistaken. We do have a final question now. Do you have any tips for essays?
I can go first. So I definitely would suggest reading all of the questions first, and then I would definitely plan out what you want to mention in each section. It can be easy to overlap in some parts, so I would definitely like plan out your answers, and you don't have to give us a super long answer. We don't need we don't need to a super long answer for everything, but we definitely are interested in hearing about your work and about you and about what you're hoping to do in the future. And just something that that's personally important to me is like, you also don't have to come and unload your trauma. That doesn't make your work any more worthy. I mean, if it's part of your story, it's completely valid, but I think sometimes people feel like they have to tell us about every single difficulty they've been through, and like that's really not necessary. We really will just look at your work, and obviously we will take your answers into consideration. They don't need to be super dramatic or sad or anything like that.
I want to add that I think to be very candid while making it I think geared towards your professional goals was the way that I tried to organize the essays, because there are very personal sides to art making and then the content of my work, but specifically how I think I need more support specifically from this fellowship was the key that I tried to put in the essays. And I think try not to make it sound like you are the person who should get it. I don't know if that make any sense. Like, don't try to like make yourself fit into a certain type of person that you think it should be. And then I was kind of like, I have an idea of what the fellowship could do, and I hope it matches. And if it doesn't, then I have to look for something else, because I needed a type of support that is with other immigrant artists, where I don't want to just emphasize the immigrant identity, but I thought that if everyone was an immigrant, then we can focus on other aspects of our work. So that's something that I put in. And then what wasn't, if it doesn't match with the fellowship, then I was like, then I have to look for somewhere else. So I think that's my tip, which don't try to change your direction for the application.
Those are excellent tips. I don't know if I have anything to add to that. I guess just to know, that's sort of a +1 to what both Gracia and Yao said, is that we're not looking for a certain kind of story or a certain kind of person. If your work is, very funny and carefree, like that's exciting to us too. If it's dealing with more serious and sort of like identity-oriented questions, that's really exciting to us too. We've really had a broad range of projects that fellows have been working on, and places that their careers have been developing. And, we just want to get to know you and where you are and where you hope to go. And once again, we have a great team of reviewers who really read and look at and ponder and talk about each of your portfolios very closely. So the more that we feel like we're getting to know who you really are and what's important to you and what you're looking for, I feel like the more helpful we can be.
Do we have to emphasize being immigrant artists? And I think it's a really great question.
No, in fact, we keep shortening the name of this fellowship. When it first started in 2019, it was called the Define American Undocumented Artist Fellowship, which is sort of a long name. And we also saw that was really focusing on an undocumented aspect of an identity, which for some artists, that might be a really important piece of their identity that they're exploring in their work. And for other artists, it's not as important. So we not only took away the requirement of being undocumented, but we took it out of the name of the fellowship. Now we just call it the Define American Fellowship. We don't even have like artist or storyteller in the name, because we know that each artist or storyteller is defining their career in different ways, based on different aspects of their identity or different aspects of their work. And so we have it very broad now, on purpose. So you can be someone who talks about your immigrant identity and work, or someone who doesn't talk about it at all. Both are welcome. I want to thank you. Thank you, Juno. That was such wonderful moderation. So many more questions than I was expecting. Thank you all for bringing them. If you still have questions, or if you have specific situations that you feel like we didn't cover in this, feel free to email us at fellowship@defineamerican.com. You can also find that email address on our website. We also have some tips for applying on the website that go through everything that we mentioned in this presentation. You can find it under the tips for applying and expectations for the fellowship at defineamerican.com/fellowship.